It was the perfect find. At least, that's what I thought when I signed the lease. The apartment was small but cozy, tucked away on the third floor of an old brick building in the heart of the city. It had charm, the kind of vintage character you don't often find anymore. Hardwood floors, a clawfoot bathtub, and tall windows that let in the morning sun. Best of all, it was affordable, almost suspiciously so, but I didn't think much of it. I was eager to move in and start a new chapter of my life. The first week was uneventful. I spent my evenings unpacking and arranging furniture, enjoying the peace of living alone for the first time. The neighbors were quiet, the street noise minimal, and everything seemed perfect. At night, the creaks and groans of the old building became background noise, lulling me to sleep. It wasn't until the end of the second week that I first noticed it. It was just a faint sound, almost imperceptible. At first I thought it was the hum of the radiator, or maybe a draft moving through the walls, but as I lay in bed that night I realized it wasn't mechanical. It was softer, more rhythmic, like whispering. I strained to listen, trying to make out words, but it was too faint. I eventually brushed it off, convincing myself it was nothing more than the pipes or thin walls letting in sounds from a neighbor's TV. But the whispers didn't go away. Each night they returned. They were so faint, I couldn't pinpoint their source. At first, I thought they were coming from the apartment next door, but when I pressed my ear to the wall, the sound seemed to shift, as if it was coming from inside the walls themselves. I even checked my windows to see if it was street noise, but the whispers persisted, clear and unsettling. After a few nights of this, I started losing sleep. I began to focus on the whispers, trying to decipher them. They didn't sound like words, at least not at first. But as I listened more intently, I thought I caught fragments, a syllable here, a phrase there. And then, one night, I heard something unmistakable. My name, Sarah. It was faint, but clear enough to send a shiver down my spine. My name was being whispered from the walls. My name was being whispered from the walls. I sat up in bed, heart racing, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. Maybe I was just sleep-deprived. But as I sat there in the dark, I heard it again. Sarah. The voice was soft, almost gentle, but the way it seemed to emanate from nowhere made my skin crawl. The next morning, I tried to rationalize it. I told myself it had to be a neighbor, maybe someone who'd overheard my name and was playing some kind of prank. But when I asked around, no one admitted to hearing or saying anything unusual. My upstairs neighbor, an older woman, looked at me with genuine confusion when I asked if she'd heard whispers at night. As the days turned into weeks, the whispers grew more frequent and more specific. They didn't just say my name anymore, they described my actions. Turning off the light, they murmured as I flipped the switch. Getting into bed, they hissed as I pulled up the covers. It felt like they were watching me, narrating my every move. And it wasn't just at night, I started hearing them during the day, faint and fleeting, but always there, lurking in the background. One night, I decided I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I set up my phone to record audio and left it running as I went to bed. That night, the whispers were louder than ever, as if they knew I was trying to capture them. I lay in bed, frozen, as they grew more insistent. "We see you," they said. "We know you." The next morning, I hesitated before playing back the recording. Part of me didn't want to know what I'd captured, but I had to hear it. I needed to know I wasn't crazy. When I hit play, the whispers were there, clearer than I'd ever heard them. They spoke my name, described my movements, and then, at the very end, came a chilling message. "Leave, or we'll make you." I stared at my phone in disbelief. The whispers weren't just random noises, they were deliberate, intelligent, and they wanted me out. I tried to leave that day, packing a bag and heading for the door, but something stopped me. It was as if the air itself had grown heavy, pressing down on me, making it impossible to move. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. and the whispers filled the room, louder than ever. "Stay," they commanded, "stay with us." When I finally managed to leave, I went straight to a friend's house, too shaken to explain everything. I stayed there for a few days, but no matter where I went, I felt like I was being watched. And at night, even miles away from the apartment, I heard the whispers. Faint, but unmistakable. They followed me. Desperate, I returned to the apartment with a paranormal investigator. He brought equipment, EMF meters, cameras, and audio recorders, and we spent hours trying to document the phenomena. But as soon as he entered, the apartment fell silent. The whispers were gone, as if they were mocking me. He found nothing unusual and left, telling me it was probably just stress or an overactive imagination. That night, alone in the apartment, the whispers returned with a vengeance. They were louder, more aggressive, and no longer confined to the walls. I saw shadows moving in the corners of my vision, dark shapes that disappeared when I turned to look. And then, as I lay in bed, the walls began to tremble. Cracks spread across the paint, and from those cracks, something began to emerge. Dark, shadowy figures seeped out, their forms shifting and writhing. They had no faces, only voids where eyes and mouths should have been. "Leave!" they roared in unison, their voices echoing through the room. I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my phone and bolted out the door, not even stopping to grab my belongings. I ran down the stairs and into the street, gasping for air, tears streaming down my face. I didn't stop running until I was blocks away. The next day, I broke my lease and never returned to the apartment. I tried to move on, but the experience haunted me. I'd wake up at night, convinced I could hear whispers in the distance. Even now, as I sit in a new apartment, far away from that place, I sometimes catch faint murmurs, soft and fleeting. And every time I do, I wonder if the whispers ever really let me go. "Excuse me, my friends," the voice was potentially very lucrative and the girl a fragile one. "Excuse me, my friends," the voice was potentially very let me go. I live in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where nothing really happens. My house is at the end of a cul-de-sac, surrounded by other small, unremarkable homes. It's not isolated, but it's just far enough from the main road that the nights are eerily silent. For years, I enjoyed the solitude, but that changed a few months ago when something strange started happening. It began innocently enough. One night, I was jolted awake by the sound of my doorbell. I checked my phone. It was 3:33 a.m. Confused, I groggily got out of bed and stumbled to the door. I peered through the peephole, but no one was there. Thinking it was some kid pulling a prank, I went back to bed. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time, but the next night, it happened again. The doorbell rang exactly at 3:33 a.m. Once again, I found no one there. My porch light was on and the street was completely still. A chill ran down my spine, but I convinced myself it had to be some faulty wiring or a malfunction. The timing was weird, but I figured it was just a coincidence. My attempt to raise my voice succeeded only on the third try. My focus slipped away, and as I walked to the back door, the timing was weird, but I figured it was just a coincidence. By the third night, I was starting to get frustrated. At 3:33 a.m., the doorbell rang again. This time, I waited by the door for a few minutes before opening it, hoping to catch whoever was messing with me, but when I finally stepped outside, the street was empty. It was unnervingly quiet, not even a breeze to rustle the trees. I'll admit, I was starting to feel uneasy. The next day, I decided to install a security camera. I placed it above my front door, angled to cover the porch and walkway. I figured if someone was messing with me, I'd catch them on camera. That night, I went to bed feeling more in control, confident that I'd put an end to the mystery. At 3:33 a.m., the doorbell rang. My heart raced as I checked my phone's live feed from the security camera. At first, the screen showed nothing but my empty porch. Then, just at the edge of the camera's range, I saw it, a dark figure standing perfectly still. It was humanoid, but its features were impossible to make out. The figure was just standing there, as if it knew exactly where the camera's motion sensors stopped detecting movement. I didn't open the door that night. Instead, I sat frozen, staring at the screen until the figure slowly backed away into the darkness. I didn't sleep after that. The pattern continued. Every night at exactly 3:33 a.m., the doorbell would ring and the figure would appear on the camera. It never moved closer, never stepped fully into view, but it was always there, standing at the edge of the frame like it was watching me. I couldn't make sense of it. Who would go to such lengths just to play a prank? And why? I started losing sleep, dreading the nightly visit. My coworkers noticed I looked exhausted, but I didn't tell them what was happening. What could I even say, that some shadowy figure was ringing my doorbell every night at the same exact time? I didn't want to sound crazy. One night, I decided to confront whoever or whatever it was. I left a note on the porch, taped to the door. It was simple. "What do you want?" Then, I left the door slightly ajar and waited. At 3:33 a.m., the doorbell rang. My heart pounded as I watched the live feed on my phone. The figure appeared as usual, standing just out of range. For what felt like an eternity, it didn't move. Then, slowly, it approached the door. I held my breath as it reached down and took the note. The doorbell camera captured its hand, pale, almost gray, with long, spindly fingers. The figure didn't leave immediately. It lingered for a moment, then slipped something under the door before backing away into the shadows. I waited until I was sure it was gone before I approached the door. My hands were trembling as I picked up the object it had left behind. It was the note I'd written, but the other side was covered in symbols, intricate, jagged marks that didn't look like any language I'd ever seen. The sight of it made my skin crawl. I spent the next day trying to decipher it, searching online for anything similar. Eventually, I found a forum where someone recognized the symbols as part of an ancient, obscure language associated with occult practices. The translation chilled me. Invitation accepted. I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even tell them? That some figure at my door left me a cryptic message in a dead language? They'd think I was crazy. That night, the doorbell didn't ring. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of relief. But then, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard something else. Faint footsteps inside the house. My blood ran cold as I realized the sound was coming from downstairs. I grabbed my phone and checked the security camera. The live feed showed the door closed and locked, but the motion sensor in my living room had been triggered. Something was inside. I could hear it moving, slow and deliberate, like it wanted me to know it was there. I stayed locked in my bedroom, clutching my phone, too terrified to move. The footsteps eventually stopped, but the silence was worse. I didn't sleep at all that night. In the morning, I found nothing out of place, but I knew better than to think it was over. The next few nights were worse. The doorbell didn't ring, but the noises inside the house grew louder. Doors creaked open, objects moved, and I started hearing whispers. Low, guttural sounds that I couldn't understand. It felt like the figure wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside. With me. I tried everything. Sage, salt, lights, even a priest. But nothing worked. Friends and family dismissed my experiences as stress or overwork, leaving me feeling more isolated than ever. The figure didn't appear on the camera again, but its presence was undeniable. It wanted me to know I wasn't alone. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and left, driving aimlessly until I found a cheap motel. I stayed there for a week, too afraid to go back. But even in the motel, I couldn't escape it. At 3:33 a.m., I woke to the sound of knocking on my door. When I checked the peephole, there was no one there. But I knew it had found me. Driving to the motel, I called home one morning. I had no idea whether he'd heard me or not. I've since moved to a new city, far away from that house, but I can't shake the feeling that it's still with me. Camping deep in the woods had always been one of those things I loved and dreaded in equal measure. There's something both freeing and unnerving about being so far removed from civilization. Last summer, a group of friends and I decided to spend a weekend doing just that, camping in a remote part of the state park where cell service was non-existent and the nearest road was a 2-hour hike away. There were 5 of us: Sarah, the adventurous one who planned the trip; Mike, her boyfriend, who was more about drinking beer than enjoying nature; Jenny, who had an arsenal of scary stories up her sleeve; Brandon, the skeptic who always found a way to ruin the mood with logic; and me, the cautious one, always carrying extra supplies just in case. The first day was uneventful. We set up camp in a clearing surrounded by dense trees. The hike in had been grueling, but we were in high spirits as we unpacked our tents and lit the campfire. The air was crisp, and the night sky was a blanket of stars. It was the kind of scene you'd see on a postcard. Perfect, peaceful, and quiet. Too quiet. Jenny started telling stories as we huddled around the fire. At first they were the usual urban legends: a hitchhiker who disappears, a ghostly figure seen in the rearview mirror. But then she brought up something different, a local legend she'd read about online. "This area has its own ghost story," she began, her face illuminated by the flickering flames. "They say there's a spirit that haunts these woods, but it only appears if you say its name. It haunts the orchards, the fields, even the dairy cows, so it's appear every time we plant." Mike laughed. "What's the name?" Jenny hesitated, then smirked. "I'm not sure if I should tell you. Supposedly just saying it is enough to, you know, summon it." "Come on, Jenny," Brandon scoffed. "It's just a story. Don't tell me you actually believe that crap." Sarah leaned in. "What's the harm? It's not real, right?" Jenny finally gave in. "Fine. The name is Elira." The fire crackled as the word hung in the air. We all exchanged glances, half smiling, half uneasy. "Elira," Mike repeated, grinning. "See? Nothing happened." We laughed it off, but the mood had shifted. There was an unspoken tension as we settled into our tents that night. I chalked it up to Jenny's storytelling, but something about the name lingered in my mind. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of branches snapping. At first I thought it was just an animal, but then I noticed shadows flitting between the trees. I told myself it was the flickering firelight playing tricks on my eyes, but my gut told me otherwise. The next morning we found Sarah sitting by the fire, pale and visibly shaken. She rolled up her sleeve to show us her arm. There was a symbol carved into her skin, intricate but shallow, like it had been scratched with a fine blade. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Who did this?" We all denied it, but suspicion lingered. Brandon was quick to dismiss it as some kind of sleepwalking accident. "You probably scratched yourself on a branch," he said. Sarah didn't look convinced. That day felt heavier. The forest seemed darker, the air thicker. We tried to enjoy ourselves, but the unease was palpable. By nightfall, we were all on edge. When I woke up the second night, the whispers had started. They were faint, like wind rustling through leaves, but there was a cadence to them, a rhythm that felt deliberate. This time, it was Brandon who found a symbol on his leg. He was furious, accusing Mike of playing some elaborate prank. Mike fired back, and soon the group was in chaos, voices rising as accusations flew. "Enough," Jenny shouted. "This isn't funny anymore. We need to leave." We agreed to pack up at first light, but by then it was too late. That night, the shadows grew bolder. They moved closer to the fire, coalescing into shapes that were almost human, but not quite. We huddled together, too terrified to move. Then it happened. one of the shadows stepped into the firelight. It was tall and impossibly thin, its features obscured as if cloaked in smoke. Mike panicked and bolted into the woods, despite our shouts to stay. His screams echoed through the trees, then abruptly stopped. Silence fell, and none of us dared to follow. When dawn broke, we found his body. He was slumped against a tree, his eyes wide open, his skin covered in the same intricate symbols we'd seen before. But this time they were deeper, almost burned into his flesh. We didn't waste time. We grabbed our gear and tried to follow the trail back to the car, but the forest had changed. Paths we'd taken before seemed to loop back on themselves. Our phone's batteries drained inexplicably fast, leaving us without navigation. The whispers grew louder, now clearly calling our names. Exhausted and terrified, we stumbled back to the clearing, realizing we were trapped. That's when the figure appeared again, standing at the edge of the trees. This time, it spoke, though its voice was barely more than a whisper. It offered us a deal. One of us had to stay behind as its companion, or none of us would leave. We argued, desperation turning us against each other. In the end, Jenny volunteered. "It's the only way," she said, her voice shaking. "Just go. Don't look back." We tried to protest, but she was firm. With tears streaming down our faces, we left her standing by the fire as we retraced our steps. This time, the path led us out. We made it back to civilization, but nothing has been the same since. Sarah, Brandon, and I keep in touch, but there's an unspoken distance between us. We never talk about that night, and we've all developed an aversion to the woods. Enter. Sometimes, I wake up at night and swear I can hear Jenny's voice, faint and distant, calling my name. And I know that somewhere out there, she's still with it, a part of the curse we foolishly unleashed.